Welcome to today's Explainer. We're about to dive into one of the most compelling, dramatic, and honestly pretty tragic stories in modern history. We are looking at the absolute ultimate collision between unmatched human brilliance and, well, deeply toxic management. We're going to unpack the exact moment, the literal spark that ignited Silicon Valley. And as we'll see, it's a story of how a single failure in psychological stability accidentally forged the modern world right before our eyes.
But to really wrap our heads around this massive shift, we actually need to slow down for a second. Picture this. It's the winter of 1955. The Santa Clara Valley was definitely not a landscape of gleaming glass buildings and massive server farms. No, it was just a 50-mile grid of prune, apricot, and walnut orchards stretching south from the San Francisco Bay. The economy back then? It didn't move at the speed of fiber optics. It moved at a deliberate, seasonal velocity. It was agricultural, it was cyclical, and it was quiet.
So that brings us to the massive structural inversion that we're examining today. How exactly did this quiet valley of heart's delight permanently transform into the hyper-dense, trillion-dollar crucible of silicon? Like, what was the exact catalyst that fundamentally rearranged the entire DNA of this region?
To answer that, we have to talk about the hardware. Before this era, computing relied on traditional vacuum valves. These were basically fragile glass tubes that manipulated electrical currents across open space. And they were terrible. They were bulky, they generated a massive amount of heat, and they burned out constantly. But then, enter the solid-state junction transistor. This breakthrough replaced all that clunky free-space electron flow with a solid-state crystal matrix. It's the exact foundational technology powering the device you're watching this on right now. It was microscopic, ran completely cool, and boasted a near-infinite operational lifespan. It was, for all intents and purposes, completely indestructible.
Now, the man who co-invented that solid-state miracle was Dr. William Bradford Shockley. We're talking about a theoretical titan who would actually win the Nobel Prize in Physics for his work. In February of 1956, he established the Shockley Semiconductor Laboratory at 391 San Antonio Road in Mountain View. He literally just leased a simple apricot packing warehouse. But you might be wondering, why Mountain View? Why not the established industrial hubs over on the East Coast? Well, simply because his aging mother lived in nearby Palo Alto and he wanted to be close to her. That deeply personal, almost mundane decision ironically introduced the pure silicon matrix to the valley, and it permanently shifted the global epicenter of technology.
Shockley knew he needed absolutely unparalleled intellect to build his new empire. And since his, let's say, volatile reputation had already alienated his former colleagues, he launched an intense campaign targeting brilliant, uncorrupted young minds just coming out of East Coast universities. He assembled an apex brain trust. You can kind of think of it as a scientific assembly of superheroes. You had Robert Noyce, a fiercely intuitive physicist, Gordon Moore, a master physical chemist, and Gene Herney, a brilliant mathematical physicist. It was an absolutely elite, world-class team.
And the energy in that converted apricot warehouse was just electric. Shockley was a phenomenal lecturer. He could take totally opaque quantum mechanics and break them down into crystal-clear visual geometries. Driven by this thrilling realization that they were standing right on the very edge of human capability, these young scientists were pulling 14-hour days. Shockley had successfully built what was essentially the ultimate reactor core of human talent.
But here is where our narrative takes a really tragic pivot. Because as it turns out, possessing scientific genius does not automatically grant you leadership skills. Within just a few short months, it became glaringly apparent that Shockley completely lacked the emotional intelligence and psychological stability required to manage the massive intellectual energies he had deliberately clustered together in that single room.
The psychological fragility quickly manifested as a massive strategic rift. The team, led by Noyce and Moore, wanted to mass-produce cheap, highly reliable silicon diffusion transistors for the booming military aerospace market. I mean, there was immediate, overwhelming demand. But Shockley? He completely rejected this. Instead, he became monomaniacally obsessed with an unproven device called the four-layer diode. This was a mechanism so complex it was practically impossible to manufacture reliably at scale. It was an absolute manufacturing nightmare, but he absolutely refused to pivot. As production timelines for his diode obsession started slipping, Shockley's management style rapidly devolved. He suffered from a seriously toxic inability to share intellectual authority. Any alternative engineering idea was immediately viewed as a hostile threat to his Nobel prestige. So, that utopian research sanctuary, it quickly devolved into a claustrophobic, paranoid panopticon where every single scientist felt they were being watched and judged at all times.
The sheer escalation of his tyranny is honestly almost unbelievable.
First, he took all the salaries and psychological test profiles and made them completely transparent, literally posting them on the laboratory walls to force this weird Darwinian survival of the fittest competition. Then, the definitive crisis hit. A lab assistant suffered a minor cut from some broken glassware. Shockley became intensely, genuinely convinced this was coordinated internal corporate sabotage. His solution to a broken beaker, he mandated that his entire elite engineering staff submit to polygraph lie detector tests. Yeah, you heard that right, lie detector tests over broken glass.
Well, the engineers flat out refused. Realizing the lab was heading into total operational bankruptcy, they executed a desperate three-step intervention. They bypassed Shockley entirely and went straight to their financier, Arnold Beckman, delivering a collective ultimatum: remove Shockley from operational management. Now, Beckman faced a really tough choice, but ultimately captivated by Shockley's Nobel prestige, he backed Shockley. Beckman commanded the engineers to submit to the founder's absolute authority, and that right there was a pivotal, irreversible mistake.
Disgusted by this decision, 8 of the top researchers committed a radical, practically unprecedented act of corporate rebellion. Remember, in this era, lifetime loyalty to legacy institutions was the absolute norm. But these young scientists, they resigned en masse. Shockley was consumed by a sense of personal betrayal and fury, and he permanently branded them with a name that would go down in history: the Traitorous Eight.
But this mass walkout wasn't an ending at all. Actually, it was an ignition sequence. Backed by Arthur Rock and Sherman Fairchild, the 8 launched Fairchild Semiconductor just down the road. And this company became a total industrial supernova. They committed to mass-producing the exact same silicon transistors Shockley had rejected. And crucially, Robert Noyce introduced widespread employee stock options. This structurally aligned the workers' compensation directly with the exponential growth of the enterprise. For the very first time, the workers became the owners. It was a real game changer.
But the story doesn't end there, because Fairchild itself soon fractured. When employees there grew frustrated with creeping bureaucracy, they essentially repeated the rebellion of 1957. Noyce and Moore left to found Intel. Jerry Sanders launched AMD. Eugene Kleiner pioneered Sand Hill Road Institutional Venture Capital. So in a wildly ironic twist, Shockley's paranoid management had accidentally created the exact genetic material of Silicon Valley. The historical rule that corporate fragmentation and founder spin-offs are what actually drive progress.
Which brings us to a really fascinating revelation about the present day. When we look at Phase 7, the modern era of artificial intelligence, we are witnessing a striking structural repetition of the exact Shockley-Fairchild dynamic. Sure, the aesthetic has moved from chemical packing hoods to neural network weights, but the underlying logic, it remains completely unchanged.
Look at what happened in 2021. Top research scientists led by Dario and Daniela Amodi grew deeply frustrated with the shifting commercial focus and corporate governance inside OpenAI. Repeating the precise script executed by the Traitorous Eight, they staged a massive collective walkout. These defectors then founded Anthropic, dedicating their new firm to open-source algorithmic safety and structural alignment. It's like history completely repeating itself.
What is distinct, however, is the geography. Shockley planted his original lab in the isolated, car-dependent suburban sprawl of Mountain View simply to be near his mother. But modern AI founders completely reject that isolation. They demand a hyper-dense, walkable urban grid in San Francisco, an area now nicknamed Cerebral Valley. They require that intense, multidisciplinary cross-pollination that originally filled the rooms of 391 San Antonio Road, but they brought it right into the modern urban fabric.
When you actually put these two eras side by side, the parallels are just staggering. In 1956, the catalyst was paranoia, leading to the Traitorous Eight walkout, which ultimately ignited the Silicon Valley startup engine. Now look at the 2020s AI walkout core. The catalyst is a commercial focus shift, leading to the Anthropic safe alignment split, resulting in what we see today as the global cognitive hegemony matrix. The structural logic from 1956 to today is totally unbroken.
Ultimately, William Shockley built a magnificent monument of human intellect, only to destroy it through his own psychological fragility. But by forcing his brightest students to rebel, he unwittingly unlocked the region's ultimate competitive secret. Technology cannot be chained to a single, static corporate hierarchy. The true enduring power of this ecosystem is its unmatched capacity to capture genius, tolerate spectacular structural fractures, and then recycle those broken shards into entirely new empires.
So, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Is technological progress ultimately dependent on shattered corporate hierarchies? Think about that. The next time you see a headline about a massive tech walkout or some groundbreaking new startup spinning off from a giant, I want you to remember the apricot warehouse. Remember the paranoia, the spark, and the traitor's 8. Keep learning, keep exploring, and always keep questioning the structures around you.